His eyes flew open then, and what snapped him out of the dream wasn't his freezing balls, which had suddenly shrunk to what felt like the size of walnuts, nor even the horror to his right, but the thought of his guns. Hi, I'm Rachel.
And I'm Matt.
Welcome to the Strange and Beautiful Book Club. So, we're back, and it's time to talk about The Dark Tower, Book 2, The Drawing of the Three by Stephen King. And we have a correction. In the first one, I got real confused about who the man in black was.
Yeah, Walter and Martin.
Which, in my defense, is confusing, okay?
I think he only really brings it up one time.
And then he brings it up again in the beginning because he gives you a synopsis.
He brings it up multiple times in The Drawing of the Three.
Yeah. The man in black turns out to be a fellow named Walter who falsely claimed the friendship of Roland's father in those days before the world moved on. But Martin is the one who put Walter up to it.
Yeah, and
Yes.
Martin is the one that seduced his mother. And Martin was a much more powerful sorcerer than Walter / the man in black.
Yeah. Yes. We know that Roland was forced to an early trial of manhood after discovering that his mother had become the mistress of Martin, a much greater sorcerer than Walter, who, unknown to Roland's father, is Martin's ally. So Walter was playing both sides. So Walter's the bad guy. Martin is the umbrella bad guy. I don't know why they're not the same character. Maybe this will make a lot more sense later. Oh, isn't the fourth book a flashback?
It doesn't start as a flashback.
Okay. I've seen the fourth book described as like a origin story.
Oh, okay, because that's where I lost the series.
Yeah, that's where I lost it.
I was out-towered.
But the drawing of the three begins on the same beach, less than 7 hours later. Okay, this book is better.
Much better.
Much better.
Yes.
I get it. I get the setup now. And actually, Stephen King revised the first book. We read a first edition because I picked it up at the thrift store. And it was published at the right moment.
Dry male fiction is an understatement.
Yeah. So I picked that up at the thrift store. So I got a 1980 whenever he published the first one.
Yeah.
But in the 2000s, he revised the first one. He said he always felt like the Dark Tower felt like a draft.
Okay.
And that he wanted to go back and refine it. Probably he wrote it and then realized where all of this was going and then revised it to match. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the revised version.
Okay.
Because I want to know, does it tie in? It ties in okay. But in terms of complexity, nowhere near what we're going to get in this book.
Right.
Because this book is about him meeting his party. We got to get the party together.
Yeah, we're gathering all the party members for the adventure.
Yeah, the first book was like this, I don't even know. The introduction to the world. It was like a toe dip into this world.
Yeah.
And then the second book is like, okay, here we fucking go.
Right. Like we said, it felt like a long prequel. And
it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a long prologue chapter.
Yeah. This one was really great, and I was sailing really along until we got to one specific part, and we will talk about that in order. So let me sip this coffee, and then I'm gonna open this book. I will say I'm glad we're reading this for the podcast, because were we not, I'd have read the first one and then been like, "Whoa, fuck that noise," not read the second one.
And that's probably why you never read it in the first place.
Right. I mean, yeah. I have a complicated relationship with series. I don't know why, but I get series fatigue like really fast. And
Hmm.
if anything, doing podcasts has taught me that. Like I knew I did, but I didn't realize how quick I'll drop a series until I was forced to read like a 7-book series with Feast, Sheath, and Shatter. And I was like, I'm dying. I can't read this thing.
I remember. I have many memories since you started the podcast of you getting up, your alarm goes off, you pick up your book, you pull out your calculator, you figure out how many pages you need to read, you put the bookmark there, and then you just sit in the chair until you get to that bookmark, and then you slam it shut and put it down and say, okay, I've taken my dose for today.
But I did it, and that's what matters in the end. And I'm glad I read this. I am. Stephen King, I don't realize it. It's kind of like being in hot water.
Hmm.
You don't realize how good you've got it until you try to read somebody else.
Yeah.
So you read Stephen King and you're like, oh, he didn't have anything going in that one. Like, it wasn't a great whatever. And then you try to read another book and you're like, oh, it was fine. He did a great job. It was fine. I just was spoiled for, how, because I think he's a really good, there's a reason why he is like a highly published horror writer.
Right.
And it's because he's really good at it. And he's really good at really quickly describing a thing, describing a situation, describing a sound or a smell.
Describing a set of testicles.
Yeah. And really capturing the moment in one,
Yeah.
like just one stroke. And then he
like
can
immersing
move on.
you into it. Yeah.
And this works really well for the way he likes to write because he loves a third party lateral move.
Mm-hmm.
Especially, like the hero, the bad guy is set to do his bad thing. The heroes are preparing. They're getting ready for battle. We're in the midst of this really dramatic, everything's moving. He's been flipping point of views between all the different hero characters and villain characters to really drive up that like everything that he's been setting up has been finally coming to fruition. And then he'll go, whoop, let's talk about the lady. They're all running down the street. So let's talk about the lady in her shop who's sweeping the floor, who looks out the window, who sees the people running down the street and thinks, oh, that's really weird. I wonder what's happening with that. And then to the guy across the way who's sitting in his porch. Like he loves that moment.
And it gives you some perspective into their setting.
It lets you sit in it for a minute so that when you go back, it feels like, okay, let's go. Instead of, okay, come on. What's going to happen? Like, how are we going to resolve this? It's like, okay, all right, I'm ready now. Like, let's see how this goes. And that's exactly what this book is Roland is in a moment of really high tension. And he's like, well, hey, let's go in somebody else's head for a little while.
Hi, Eddie.
And Detta/Odetta and Mott. The last guy is,
oh, yes.
the pusher.
Fred?
No.
Fred Mott or something Mott?
No.
Jack Mort.
Jack Mort. Thank you. All I could, I had the and the sound, but I couldn't remember the middle part. So when last we left Roland, he had wandered out to the beach. Jake is dead because he dropped him. In order to get to the man in black, they had a palaver. Palaver that lasted 10 years-ish. Ish. And then he passed out on the beach. And we literally come back to him dreaming. And he's dreaming about the sailor. And he goes, but this was no nightmare. It was a good dream. It was good because he was the one drowning. And that meant he was not Roland at all, but Jake. And he found this a relief because it would be far better to drown as Jake than to live as himself. A man who had, for a cold dream, betrayed a child who trusted him.
Which may speak to how Roland actually feels about this whole quest for the Dark Tower.
I really like the Roland character. You predicted this. I should just start listening to you because you were like, you will love Murderbot. And I was like, meh. Then I read it and I was like, this is the best book I've ever read in my life. And you were like, yeah, I told you that. And then you were like, you're really going to like Roland. And I was like, I don't know. Because in the first book, he doesn't, he's not really a character. He's like an archetype. He's just a walking archetype.
Right. He's a narrator.
Yeah. And so in this book, I was like, oh, I really like Roland. And you were like, yeah, I know. I told you were going to really like Roland. I like Roland because he is a very focused, driven, practical. I will do whatever it takes to accomplish my goal. But he is also aware of the consequences of the things that he does. So, yes, he let Jake die to get the man in black. And if you asked him, he'd probably tell you he'd fucking do it again. But he's sad about it.
Oh, yeah.
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 For a long time. Like it hurts him, but he'd do it again.
I think there's even a line in the book where that something about that comes up, and he's like, yeah, I don't like that it happened, but I would do it again.
Yeah. In the service of duty, there was never any acceptable reason for denial.
There's so many good lines.
Because he's like, I just want to sleep. I want nothing more than to sleep. I fucking hate myself. I can't believe I did that. For what? Now I'm on this beach. I've finally caught the man in black, a quest that has taken me 20 years. And now what? Now what? What do I do? And
Take the next step.
Right. And he will, because he literally has nothing. You know what?
There's nothing else to him.
He has nothing left but the impulse to simply soldier on. Roland is the definition of trudging. He has just been trudging for 20 years. And so he wakes up because a weird lobster creature. Well, first, there's a line here that kind of illustrates what I was talking about with the way that Stephen King can set the scene for you.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you were reading these, in real time, it's been years since you read The Dark Tower. So he's got to get you back in the world, and he's got to get you back in the world quickly and believably. And so we get his eyes flew open then. Oh, that's what I already read. It's the one about he says, good, all right, I'll drown, he thought, listening to the roar of the sea. Let me drown. But this was not the sound of the open deeps. It was the grating sound of water with a throat full of stones. And so
Rocky Beach.
You immediately get the if you've ever been on a rocky beach, you know that sound where when it rolls back out, the rocks move and it makes like a
rattly noise.
Yeah. And it's like, oh, okay, cool. Like that's a really great. I immediately have a very clear image of where Roland is and what it's like to be on this beach, which is what Stephen King is really good at. Characters and really quickly establishing what's moving around, what's happening around his characters.
And it's using language about the relevant senses, which maybe he's just really in tune with the sensations in his body, which is why he's always talking about testicles, or he always brings that up.
Yeah. I think Stephen King is
that's a thing that, oh, if a guy is reading this and I say, oh, and my balls tightened. It's a visceral sensation that brings you into the moment.
He's a very physical writer.
Yeah.
He's not always telling you what's happening in his characters' heads. Sometimes he'll give you like a snippet of their inner monologue.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, he's like, they're sweating, their balls are tightening. And you get it. He's very good at showing you, not telling you.
Yeah.
I kind of want to know if there's someone who's written like a treatise on all of the imagery in these books.
Oh, I'm sure.
Because I'm sure there is way more than you can pick up on one read.
Oh, yeah. There are people with the cork boards and papers and pictures and pins
and red string.
Different colors of strings.
Yeah.
All about the Dark Tower.
Because almost immediately the man in black, not the man in black, he's dead. Roland. Why can I not keep, and it's fine. Roland, first he has to run away from the lobstrosities.
Right.
But he's also beating himself up internally. He's getting beat up externally. He's getting eaten, basically, literally. And also in his heart, he's like, I fucking killed Jake so I could have a 10-minute conversation with this dude. And now I'm stuck out here and I am no closer to the tower. And I have what have I accomplished? And so in his head, he's like running over all of the things that happened and how he feels about it. And he calls Jake his Isaac. as in his most beloved son.
Yes, that he was tested.
Yeah.
With sacrifice this your most beloved child
Yeah.
for me, your ultimate goal. And he fucking stabbed Isaac.
I know. Because in the Bible, Isaac, he doesn't kill him.
Right.
And that's the test. He's like, haha, you passed the test. You didn't do the thing that I told you to do. Haha.
That would have compromised your ideals and your character fundamentally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but Roland did, though. Roland was like, okay, yeah, I'll let him go. And you're like, okay, then was that a test? Did he not pass it? Did he pass it?
We don't know.
We don't know.
We're yet to find out.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what does happen. His hand gets eaten and part of his foot gets eaten. And then he has to reconstruct his boot, which I didn't quite get what was happening there. Because he gets part of his one boot eaten and then he's like, okay,
Yeah.
I can just do a thing with the other and then I'll have two. And I was like, I don't know what that means, but I don't give a shit because it's just your shoes. And so then we moved on to the next scene. So he drags himself farther up on the beach because the little lobstrosities. And
Yeah.
I did not listen to this audiobook. I read it. But I kind of want to know how they sounded in the audiobook.
There wasn't a sound. Oh.
Because they're like,
Data check, data chum. Like very staccato.
Okay, because they're supposed to sound like they're asking a question like, Data chick? Data
Yeah.
chum? And I don't know. It just sounds, it's creepy, okay? Like carnivorous lobsters, giant evil carnivorous lobsters.
Yeah, the narrator narrates it. Says the lobstrosity lines very staccato and quickly, like they're overlapping each other because they're all doing it at the same time.
Right, because they come out at dusk. They
Right.
come out of the water. And I kept thinking, oh, he's going to figure out how to get his fingers back because in the first book, he's a little OP, as my kids would say.
Yeah.
He kills a whole,
A whole town.
And then he kills a whole tribe full of mutant human things. And while also pumping a railway car.
Yes, he is way OP.
So it's a really interesting move for Stephen King to write a series called The Gunslinger and then immediately take away his ability to fire a gun with his right hand.
Yep.
It feels more symbolic again. Like, is he still a gunslinger?
I think it's partly narratively he is forced to depend on others.
Yeah.
And
It
his
makes him
character, as it is in The Gunslinger, has no need
for anyone.
for any support.
Right.
And so now he's compromised. He's maimed. He needs an assistant. He needs a helper.
Right. And it also sets up the entire conflict of the book.
He needs a helping hand.
But also sets up the entire conflict of the book because he starts just trudging down the beach because he's got nothing left, literally. Right. And he's like, fuck it. And so he starts walking down the beach.
And even his ammo is all wet.
Yeah. He's got nothing. He's got his right hand is useless and infected and possibly poisoned. Part of his one foot is gone. His shells are all wet. He killed Jake. The man in black is gone. And so
now
he's
just stuck on a beach.
So he just starts walking down the beach. And then he gets to a door. And my favorite thing about Roland is he's just like, okay, now this. That can't be real. That's not possible. I just got done. I DNF'd a book that I thought I was really going to like. And it's a really, people love this book. This guy's a really good writer. He probably, I don't know, maybe he's just not my thing, but I was 40% into this book and this character was still like, I don't get it. I don't know. I don't understand. I don't believe it. What is happening? Do you have any idea how obnoxious that is? You got 15% to get this character into a mode where they are in line with the story so we can just go.
Right. You can have a little bit of incredulity, confusion,
incredulity,
like denial of reality at the beginning, just to illustrate like how much of a shakeup this situation is for this character. But I mean, they got to move.
Yeah, you got to move. And the beauty of Roland is yes, he can be incredulous, but he's just going to keep going anyway.
Right? He's like, oh, I have no idea what this phrasing means, but I'm still going to keep going.
Yeah, pray for rain, but dig a well while you're waiting. Like, let's just get this shit going. And so when he sees the door, he's like, okay, cool. This is a thing. And so he looks around it, and when it disappears when he's behind it, and he's like, okay, it's a magic door. All right, let's do this. And so
what happens when I open it?
What happens when I open it? So he opens the door and he's like, ah! And he shuts the door.
He is 100% confident in his ability to, like, psychologically handle anything that happens to him.
Hmm.
And I think that's the gunslinger attitude.
And if he fails, he fails.
It's like, I remember my first job out of grad school. I was at this startup. I was talking to like a hardware engineer, like a electronic engineer, and we were kind of spitballing some physics stuff. And he was like, "You're always so willing to just have an idea, have confidence that that idea might work, and then just try it." And
Yeah.
I said, "Well, my undergraduate physics advisor gave us this kind of speech one time, and he's like, there's a perception of people that get a physics degree that you will be expected to maintain. And it is that expectation is like you can handle whatever problems come up, like in a like intellectual, like more academic way. Like, here's a technical problem. You got a physics degree. You have the capacity to handle, or at least like perceive that problem and maybe comment on it.
Well, I think it's the willingness to fail.
Yes.
I don't care if I failed at that.
Because making an attempt and failing is still learning.
Yes.
And the whole mindset is, I have incomplete information, but I can observe and update for the next experiment.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's very similar to the gunslinger attitude. Like, all that training that he went through as a child was not the core skill of a gunslinger, is not their ability to shoot.
Right.
It's their ability to observe and like make decisions.
Yeah.
And not be there's this guy I follow, like academic cognitive science guy, John Vervaeke, and he has this whole model for rationality as the ability to reliably overcome self-deception. And the gunslinger is really good at reliably, consistently overcoming self-deception.
He's completely integrated his shadow.
Yes.
There's no doubt in him. There's doubt in himself at sometimes after the action.
Right.
But there's no wavering when you're in the moment. It's do the thing.
Yeah.
And I think they even ask him, like, what if you get it wrong? He's like, then I get it wrong. And I will
keep going.
And then I will deal with the consequences of that when they come.
Right.
Okay.
And I think, and that's what he recognizes in Eddie is, oh, Eddie can handle himself in a time of stress, in a like
he's
moment
a
of crisis. He has the capacity to be a gunslinger. It's not, oh man, he can shoot.
Yeah.
That has nothing to do with being a gunslinger.
Yeah, it's when he's fighting naked. He's like, that's it. That's my boy. Like, yeah, he can handle this shit.
Yeah.
Because he opens the door and he immediately shuts it because it looks like he's in the sky. And it's because it's the inside of the head of a guy who is on a plane. And this is Eddie Dean. And it's our first introduction to Eddie Dean. So it's not like he's opening the door and physically walking into the world, although he can do that too. It's just that he's moving into Eddie Dean.
Right.
And then he's riding along with Eddie Dean for a little while. And like he can't quite figure out what all is happening because this is not a situation with which he has any point of reference.
Right. We're going from like almost like medieval style culture with guns
Yeah.
and maybe some like ancient ruins of more advanced technology. But essentially, you are a mostly agricultural society with a feudal system. And he's kind of near the top of that organization.
Yeah.
And then he's on a fucking plane.
Right. And he thinks the stewardesses are military because they're wearing a
Yes.
uniform.
Oh, yeah, the
and
army women.
Yeah, and it's his only. He's like, well, they must be in the military because they're wearing uniforms. And he cons one out of a sandwich.
Yep.
He's like, please, I'm just very hungry. Gets to eat tuna, and he's like, I like this tuna. He doesn't. Because he can carry the sandwich back.
In the audiobook, he calls it tuner fish.
Yeah, tuner fish.
Yeah.
Yeah, he doesn't. In the book, it's written as not tuna. He can't. There's certain things that he just can't.
Which,
like aspirin.
which
He calls
I
it
really
Aston.
like. Yeah. And
Yeah.
he's like, oh, yeah, I just can't quite get that pronunciation right. But then he explains later, he knows that if he were to fully enter Eddie's world, he would get that.
Yeah.
He would know all the words and he would be able to communicate fluently with the natives.
Yeah.
And
It's because they're not speaking the same language.
right.
It's written as the same language, but they're not. Because like when he brings Eddie over, Eddie and he, their phrasing is different, but they're using the same words,
Right.
but they're not.
Right. And that comes down to like cultural idioms versus
Right. No, but the
versus,
language
like,
has
the-
moved on. He's not
Right.
speaking English. That's why he has high speech and low speech.
right.
But we don't, to us, it sounds the same because we don't have two different, it's not like, it must be more like Korean where you have levels of politeness.
Yeah.
So he ends up finding out that Eddie is a heroin addict. That's why he's the prisoner,
Right.
because he's got a baboon on his back. And
Right,
that's
and the-
his heroin
The
addiction.
symbolism of how the way Roland talks about his interpretation of the Man in Black's tarot card reading,
Yeah.
and he's constantly referencing that. Oh, this is the prisoner. This is the Lady of Death.
Lady of Shadows.
Lady of Shadows.
Yeah.
And then you see, who's the prisoner? Oh, it's abstract. He's a prisoner of his addiction.
Right. And he calls him the prisoner. And I love when Eddie's like, stop calling me the prisoner. And he's like, I'll stop calling you when you walk out of your cage.
He's like, I'll stop calling you that when you can walk out of the cage that you're standing in.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Eddie has no response. He's like, fuck it.
I fucking hate
Yeah.
this guy. I love Eddie and Roland together because Eddie is he's very New York.
They're very similar attitudes
Yeah.
of, I know I can handle myself in a situation. I'm not going to defer to anybody because I know I'm capable of handling it. And I'm not a polite person.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Their agreeableness is low.
Yes.
Both of them are
Yes,
very
they're
low
low
in
in agreeableness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But so they get on each other's nerves,
Mhm.
basically. And I don't know. We go through a whole journey with them. Like he spends more time in our world with Eddie than with anyone else.
Yeah.
Because Eddie is he's a drug mule. He's got cocaine strapped to his armpits. And partly because Eddie's not handling it well, and partly because the gunslinger keeps coming forward and taking over his body and making him do weird shit.
Right. Which makes the stewardess suspicious.
Yeah, the stewardess is like, I think there's something weird happening here. And this is a good example of when Stephen King does a third party step.
Mm-hmm.
Because all of a sudden we're in the head of the stewardess, and she's like, well, when I did my training, they told me if you ever see anything, don't ignore it.
Right. That gut feeling that you have, that is important information.
Right.
Pay attention
Pay
to it.
attention to it. And so the gunslinger knows they have to clear the customs. He's like, yes, we
Yes,
must
the ritual of clearing the customs.
And this is when we find out.
Okay, so this is a mechanism, a
Yeah.
technique called defamiliarization.
Yeah.
And I love defamiliarization.
Right.
Where, oh, here's a thing. I'm unfamiliar with two things about this situation.
Yeah.
I'm unfamiliar with the actual like sequence of events and the context around it. I'm also unfamiliar with all of the terminology, so I have to describe this completely novel thing in my own words, and it's really, really hard to do defamiliarization just because your brain likes to be efficient and use the models that it already has for things.
Right.
And so if you constrain yourself to not use any of the familiar words, or to use familiar words in a different way, but then describe it, but you have to get in the head of somebody who's never seen this before. That's the hard part. And then describe it without your kind of automatic names for things.
And this is where Stephen King really excels.
Yeah.
He can really put himself in the head of a character, and everything becomes through that character's lens.
Mm-hmm.
And he's really good at that. His descriptions change, the way he perceives people change. He's really good at, I mean, like if you were to put yourself into a character who'd never been in our time, ties are objectively really strange. If you think about the concept of a necktie, they're really fucking weird. They're like a non-functional strip of cloth that we wear around our neck in formal occasions.
Yep.
And some of them are formal and some of them are like a mockery of formality. But being able to just, how do you know that the one with Christmas
and there's
lights
a lot
on
of
it?
nuance to it, yeah.
Only because you know it. If you didn't know it, it would be like, okay, literally anything I put around my neck is now making me formal.
Right.
Well, no, it has to be in combination with the suit. But then if you take the suit jacket off, we've changed the step level of formality without removing the tie. And he's really, really good at, like, if you had that character, he could extrapolate all that for us and put it on the page in a way that feels like, haha, yeah, I get it.
That's a funny way to say it, but yeah.
Yeah. So Roland finds,
if you have that like reaction in your head, oh, that's a funny way of saying that, or that's a funny way to look at that, the author's doing a good job.
Right. So he's very good at putting us in the head of Roland, who up until now, the most vehicular form of transportation he's ever used is a donkey, is now in a hurtling steel tube that is flying through the sky, heading to another country where he must go through some form of ritual in order to enter the country.
Yeah.
And to him, he's like, okay, it must be this thing, clearing the customs. Like, we're obviously in a magic box, and so we must do a magic is like, okay, yeah, magic. I get it. Why are we in the sky? I don't know. Magic. It's fine. Like, he just walked through a door that is on a beach that has no other. It's only on the beach because he's there, and he knows that intuitively. He's like,
this is for me.
This is for me. This is my door. And he's like, okay, let's get Eddie. And so they go through a whole thing where he helps Eddie get out of the plane by taking the cocaine over to his side.
Yeah, he figures out with the sandwich that he can bring things from Eddie's world to his world.
Yeah.
Because it's Roland's body on the beach that's hungry.
Yeah.
But it's Eddie who can get food.
Right. So he brings it over to himself. He wakes up with the sandwich in his hand and he's like, fuck yeah. And he eats the sandwich. But he's getting sicker and sicker. So he needs Eddie to try to find medicine for him. And like Eddie gets him aspirin because he gets him off the plane by taking him in the bathroom, taking him to his side. Then they cut the cocaine loose because it's taped to him. And then we go through, The good and bad thing about Stephen King is his ability to really drop you into the sensations of a moment.
Mm-hmm.
Because Eddie gets hands shoved up his ass for like chapters. Because everyone is looking for the cocaine and they are all convinced he has somehow hidden it in the only body cavity available to a man. And so like when he goes to the tower, the Leaning Tower restaurant.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really interesting because Balthazar or whatever, the guy that he goes to see, is building towers with the cards.
Yes.
And he's like, yeah, I must build the tower.
We're going to the tower.
Well, he sees the tower. And he's like, the tower. And Eddie's like, no, man, it's just a restaurant. And he's like, oh, shit. But he gets a hand shoved up his rectum trying to find the cocaine. And then when he pulls it out, it makes a popping sound. And I was like, thank you, Stephen.
Thank you for that.
I am deeply appreciative
of the sensory description.
He is one of the only authors I will get physically nauseous listening to some of his descriptions. And that was one moment. But anyway, Eddie ends up naked because they've stripped him trying to find the cocaine. He goes to go get the cocaine from Roland, ends up in a shootout, and they kill everybody. And his brother dies because Eddie's brother is the one who sort of Eddie doesn't realize
leverage,
it.
Hostage.
Yeah, Eddie doesn't realize it till he's recounting his life to the gunslinger, but Henry's the reason that all of this is happening.
Yeah.
Henry's the one who suggested he drug mule. Henry's the one who got him into drugs in the first place. Eddie was just snorting, and then he found out Eddie was shooting heroin, like injecting heroin. And so he started injecting heroin, and all of these steps have really been initiated by Henry. Eddie chose to do it too, but Henry was the influence that pulled him along.
Yeah.
And he dies. And so he's sitting there naked with his brother's head in his lap, and Roland is like, put that rotting meat aside. Got shit to do. And Eddie's like, you're such an asshole. And he's like, yeah. Oh, yeah, I know I am. Yeah. What? That's news. Get in the fucking door, Eddie.
Yeah. And I like how quickly Roland becomes a voice in Eddie's head.
Yes.
Because Roland kind of describes, through their whole experience, what he needs to be a gunslinger.
Yeah.
Like, here's what it takes mentally, psychologically, whatever, worldview wise, to be a gunslinger. And so when Eddie's in situations where he's not sure what to do, or he starts kind of waffling, there's the Roland in his head that's like, get your shit together. You know what you need to do. Just do it.
The gunslinger really immediately likes Eddie, partly because there's no one else and he's been alone for a really long time. And he's like a rebound friend because he just let Jake go.
There's a sense of, oh, here's at least someone sane for me to talk to, which is purely just the moment. Like the situation, the convenience.
Yeah.
But then here's a kindred spirit.
Yeah, and he's in a really desperate situation.
Yeah.
Because he's dying on the beach. And Eddie actually helps him out.
Yeah.
And I love the moment when he realizes, he realizes that he is relying on Eddie.
Mm-hmm.
And he tells himself, don't make the mistake of putting your heart near your hand. I love all of his little idioms.
Yeah, the little proverbs.
His little proverbs that he'll say to himself. Because he's like, I remember Hacks. Like, I liked Hacks too.
Mm-hmm.
But then Hacks was going to poison everybody. He didn't really want to. And then...
He didn't want to, but he felt that it was necessary. And I respect that he followed through on the unpleasant thing that he felt was necessary to do. And he went ahead and did it. And like, he would have done it again.
Right. But also, that never helped anybody who'd been poisoned.
Right.
Like, I may have liked him. I may still like him, but he still was doing a bad thing.
Right.
And so he tells himself, don't make the mistake of putting your heart in your hand. And then he goes, good advice. You did yourself ill to feel well of those to whom ill must eventually be done. To feel well of those to whom ill must eventually be done. He's like, I like Eddie. I really feel like we could be friends, but also I need to keep him at arm's length because, one, I don't know him well enough yet. Because he's definitely has the heart of a gunslinger, but he still is a prisoner. And he's only helping you right now because it's helping him.
Right. And Roland knows it may be necessary to sacrifice Eddie for his ultimate goal.
He might have
of
to pull
getting
another
to the tower.
Jake.
Yeah.
He might have to do it again. And he's like,
he knows that he would.
Yeah.
And he feels like he should. So
Yeah.
he doesn't want to like Eddie too much because
I
it
know.
would make the wooding and shoulding part
Really hard.
harder.
I know. I feel for everyone in this because Roland is driven by singular purpose. And Eddie just needs somebody who thinks the best of him. And Roland has no problem with the cognitive dissonance of, I like you, I respect you, I would murder you in a heartbeat if it was what I needed to do. I'd feel bad about it.
And that's the only real gripe that Eddie has against Roland.
Yeah.
Is that Eddie needs someone. I don't know. Eddie
First, Eddie
craves,
needs somebody. Yeah.
Eddie craves someone who would put themselves second to help Eddie when Eddie needs it.
Yeah.
And Roland won't do that.
Well, he does if it serves the greater good.
In the moment.
Yeah. If helping Eddie served the greater good, served his purpose, he would do it.
Yeah.
And if he didn't do it when Eddie needed him, he'd feel bad about it. But
like, he knows that Roland will put Roland's life at risk to help Eddie.
Yeah.
In a moment of crisis, like in the shootout in the drug lord's room, whatever. But Roland will not. He will not back off of the Dark Tower.
Right.
For Eddie's sake.
No. He would not make Eddie his goal.
Right.
And we get through a lot with them. We get the gunslinger aspirin, which he's like, this is the best thing I've ever had.
He's like, wow, even my fingers hurt less.
This is fucking amazing. And they get Keflex. They get like a penicillin for him to take. And we get this really cool moment where he pulls Eddie through the door because they've had this shootout. The police are on their way and he's like, Eddie, come with me. And Eddie's like, okay, fine. And so he comes with him, realizing the gunslinger knew that bringing him through the door and shutting the door was going to shut Eddie's way back to forever. And he's like, I fucking hate you. And Roland's like, that's okay. I also hate myself.
It's done. Put it behind you and take the next step forward. Obviously. And Eddie's like, I just want to be angry at you for taking away that decision from me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we come back and Roland is really sick. And so he's taking penicillin, but he's also delirious with fever. And Eddie takes care of him through all of this. He shoots the lobstrosities and cooks them and feeds him when the gunslinger will eat. And he nurses him through this because now Eddie may not like him.
having a good time of it.
No,
either.
Because Eddie is now going through withdrawal.
Yeah.
And he hates the gunslinger. And there's one plot hole here that I just want to point out.
Okay.
And it is that there are literal kilos of cocaine on the beach with Eddie and the gunslinger because they brought the drugs over.
I had the sense that Roland threw them away.
Okay, we don't talk about it.
Okay.
You may have inserted that, but also we never took them over to Balthazar's.
There's a moment where Roland is considering it.
We don't talk about them again. They never come back up.
Well, there's a scene where he's sitting there, like holding the packs of cocaine, and he knows from being in Eddie's head what it is and how much of an effect. And I think he mentions it's different than like
Devil
his
grass.
mescaline or
Yeah.
devil grass. But I thought he like decided to not give them back to Eddie.
No. Because
Okay.
they're gonna give them to Balthazar in the bathroom.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, he keeps him around for that.
Yeah, but then we have the whole shootout. We bring him over, and then as soon as he comes over, the gunslinger is delirious.
Yeah.
Just want to point that out. It's fine. It doesn't. Just because he's a heroin addict doesn't mean he's going to do cocaine.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, he doesn't do cocaine.
No.
That's why.
Right, but he's still going through a lot of withdrawal. There's cocaine right there.
Right.
It's fine. Whatever. Maybe he tossed it. I don't know. We don't talk about it. And then we start moving because now the gunslinger is better enough that they can go on their way. So they continue down the beach and we get to.
And one thing I like about this whole journey, the whole narrative of Roland is seeking the Dark Tower, is Roland has an instinctual sense of what direction he needs to go
Right.
to get towards the Dark Tower. So it's, in my head, it's like part of his like soul or whatever is attached to the Dark Tower,
Yeah.
and he knows what direction he needs to go kind of in his timeline to reach his destination.
Yeah. And so he knows they need to continue further down the beach.
Yep.
He may not know why, but he knows that that is what they should do. So they start down the beach and we get to the door labeled the Lady of Shadows.
Right. It has, the doors have pictures on them or
They have
symbols
like
on them.
a nameplate.
Oh, I thought that it was like a drawing symbol.
No, it's just a nameplate that says
okay.
the Lady of Shadows.
Okay.
So we get to the Lady of Shadows. And Eddie is like, okay, is this what my door looked like? And the gunslinger's like, yep. He's like, okay, are you going to go through it? And he's like, yep. Are you going to pull another innocent person into this world? And Roland is like, probably. And Eddie's like, I can't let you do that. I cannot let you do I can't let you do to somebody else what you did to me. I can't let you perpetuate that trauma. And Roland's like, well, that's the thing that every man has to decide for himself. And Eddie's like, if you go through that door, I will kill you. And Roland's like, okay.
Then I'll be dead.
Then I'll be dead. He's like, what? I'm telling you right now, I'm going to take your knife and I'm going to stab you. And he just goes, Ka.
God.
Ka. Ka. And Eddie's like, what? And he's like, Ka. And then he just walks through the door. Which is like purpose, destiny. Ka is an Egyptian thing. You have.
And it's a very stoic idea too.
Yeah.
Like stoicism, of evaluating what are the ultimate consequences of my possible actions. Like familiarizing yourself with, like imagining what those would be, and then accepting that as an outcome.
Yeah.
And then once you have familiarized yourself with the potential outcomes, making the decision is less arduous, less stressful, because there's less uncertainty. You've reduced the uncertainty. And so that eventually develops into, okay, I don't need to stress about what the final outcome is going to be. I accept that the decision I make, like using my best decision-making skills, produces the best outcome.
Yeah.
And so Roland is in a situation where this is a required action. I have to go through this door. It is necessary for me to get into the head of another person and bring them back here. That is the only option. That's the only livable option for me.
Yeah.
I have to do it. If Eddie's going to kill me, then I'll die doing what I loved, hating myself.
Well, what I was saying is the Ka is a thing from Egyptian culture.
Okay.
Because they believed you had different parts of your soul. And the Ka was the part of your soul that distinguishes a living person from a dead person. And it is the part of you that survives after you die.
Okay.
So when they would make those statues and put them in your tomb, those are Ka statues. That was what your Ka could come back to and live in when your body would that's why they preserve the body, so the Ka would have a place to live.
Yeah.
So your Ka is like the part of you that transcends life and death. And so it's an interesting concept that he's using it for like destiny, because
Right.
it's the part of you that is influencing the world around you beyond your life and death.
Yeah. And an acceptance of that like ultimate connection.
Right, that like I am serving a thing beyond me.
Yeah.
And it's my Ka.
Yeah.
And it's the thing that it's not about my living. It's not about this breathing body. It's about the thing that I'm doing that is changing the world around me, that will live on after I die.
Yeah.
And so we come to the part where I really started to feel like, oh no, Stephen. Oh no, Stephen. Oh no. This is Stephen King at his most 80s.
And some of Stephen King's scenes, writing doesn't age that well against modern sensibilities.
He's a little bit like Brandon Sanderson, where he's not always the best at writing women. And he has improved over time.
Yeah.
And he's not always, or wasn't always, forward thinking in terms of what will be acceptable later down the line.
Right.
So he kind of takes a risk, I would say, with Odetta, which probably didn't feel like a risk at the time, but feels really risky now, which is we have our Odetta character, who is a Black woman from the 1960s who lost the lower part of both of her legs in an accident and was also hit on the head with a brick as a child. And so she has two distinct personalities, and they are not aware of each other. There is Detta and Odetta. And she is one big bucket of problematic shit because he writes her speech phonetically.
He commits to the bit.
And she is using what we now refer to as African American vernacular English.
Yep.
Written phonetically. I struggled with this part. Not because she's not a good character or she's not an interesting, because really we spend 5 fucking minutes in New York with her. He literally dives in, turns her chair around, wheels it into the changing room, which it ends up rolling her right onto the beach. And then he shuts the door and done. We spend no time with her in her real life. All that time we spent with Eddie in his real life.
Right.
We don't get any of that with her. We immediately just pull her out of the situation she's in. And when she comes out, she's Odetta. And
right.
Odetta is very, you can tell I'm really educated because my speech is not written phonetically. And she's great. And Eddie falls in love with her like immediately. And everybody, we're moving right along. She accepts what's happening pretty quickly. And then Detta shows up. Detta is so hard because you would never write this character now. I would never.
Not as an older white man.
If a white man wrote this character in 2024, that doesn't happen. Okay. It doesn't become a bestseller. It gets canceled like immediately. And he gets away with it because it's written, 40 years ago. It's Stephen King. But I'm trying to figure out the best way to
I think the reason why even then he gets away with it is because in universe, they acknowledge this is a caricature of a Black woman speaking.
And she even
English.
is like, even Detta or Odetta will eventually say, it's not just that she's this stereotypical type of character. it's that she is an over-the-top caricature of what would be expected of, like, she's modeled after a bad version of that type of character.
Right.
Intentionally by Detta herself.
Right.
Like that type of, even Odetta mentions, or they mention, like that type of person never exists. It doesn't exist in real life. It only exists in fiction.
Right.
And so she's almost a fictional over-the-top character.
Yes.
But that doesn't make her any easier to deal with. And luckily, she doesn't survive this book. Because if she had, I don't know if we could have done the third one.
Right. And when you were reading the book, I think you had to take a lot of breaks.
I did.
When I was listening to the audiobook, the part with the section of the book with Detta in it was not even an hour of audiobook time. And so for me, it was like, oh, it wasn't that long.
Well, it's because of what she's talking about. Like every time they wake up and Detta is there, she's like, you guys were raping me. I can tell you were raping me.
Mm-hmm.
That's really hard to read about. I do not like sexual assault in books. I do not like it in television shows. I do not like it, Sam I Am. I do not like it.
Right.
And I don't like it when it's used as a cheap way of driving up drama.
Right. Cheap conflict is not.
I don't like it. And it really feels like the lowest hanging fruit of how to make a guy feel like he did something wrong is accusing him of doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And clearly they're not. They're trying their best to take care of her, despite the fact that she's trying to kill them for what felt like half the book. I know it wasn't that long, but it is long in terms of intensity for me.
Yeah.
Because I was really struggling with the way that she's written. I was struggling with the way her dialogue is written, and I was struggling with what she was saying.
Yeah.
And that was the hardest part of the book for me, not even because it's a slog in the book too. It slows the whole book down because we're moving right along, and then we have to spend so much time with the Detta character just to establish how unpleasant she is to be around.
Given that, I want to say kudos to Frank Muller for pulling that off.
Okay. That must have been like, okay, go. Because, if you're listening to this and you haven't read the book, because I know we have some people that listen to us in lieu of reading the book because they chat with me about it, and that's fine. That's whatever. Like, shortcut it. That's fine. We're like the Cliff Notes version of, but with more
Cliff Notes book podcast.
And that's fine. If you don't know what I'm talking about, check the book out from the library and just read that section, because I am not going to read any of her dialogue out loud, but you will know immediately what I'm talking about. But what they end up doing is somehow progressing, even though Detta keeps knocking her chair over and just generally being a pain in the butt.
Right. As uncooperative as possible.
Right. So we get to the third door, which was supposed to say death, because so far we've gone along with the tarot cards. And so it should be death, but not for you, gunslinger. But it's not. It's the pusher. And I love this moment because Eddie has been wearing one of the gunslinger's guns because he can't use his one on his right hip anyway because he's missing his pointer finger and his middle finger. He tells him, like, I'm too sick because he didn't take quite enough antibiotics. He's getting sick again. So he's like, I'm going to sit right here. You hustle down the beach to the door. I'll be waiting. You bring the wheelchair back, pick me up, and then take me there and leave Detta there. Leave Odetta because she's Odetta at this point. And Eddie's like, but no, she's so sad. And he's like, don't give her the gun. Give her a pile of rocks if you have to, but don't fucking give her the gun because she could be Detta when we get back.
Right.
And Eddie's like, got it. Yes. Aye, Captain. And so he runs her to the door. He sets her up and she's like,
of course, Roland, only a fool would give her the gun.
Right. And Odetta is like, it's fine. I'm going to be fine. Just give me some rocks. Like, I get it. I understand why you're not going to give me the gun. I'm fine.
At this point, they've fallen in love. They had sex. They're getting closer. They're developing their relationship.
And so Eddie's like, all right, fine. You can have the gun. So he gives her the gun and she's like,
he tries to give her the gun and she's like, no, don't give me the gun. That's stupid. because she might come back. Or is she even aware of Odetta at this point, or of Detta at this point?
No, she's not. Because she's
Okay.
making up memories. Every time
Right.
Odetta is there, she makes up
but-
memories to fill in the gap.
Odetta, when Eddie offers Odetta the gun, Odetta is like, but Roland, said not to give me the gun, right?
Yeah.
He's going to be mad at you if you give me the gun, right? Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. He'll be so mad at me if I give you the gun.
Yeah.
Then don't give me the gun. But I need to give you the gun because I love you. And
He can be mad all he wants.
yeah,
It's fine.
I'm going to leave the gun here, whether you pick it up or not, kind of thing. And fuck Roland.
Right. And so he runs back to Roland, and Roland's like, you gave her the gun. And Eddie's like, fuck you. And he's like, Eddie, you gave her the gun? Ugh. God, you are so stupid. He's like, I told you not to. And he's like, I know, but I did it anyway. And Roland's like, Ka. Here we go. So he gets run back to the door. And we find out the door says the pusher. And this is the most, if you want to know what this whole section is, watch Falling Down, the movie.
With Michael Douglas.
That's what this whole section is. Because he
from the perspective of a bystander watching Jack Mort, he suddenly turns into Michael Douglas from Falling Down.
From Falling Down. Because he goes into Jack Mort and he's like, oh, this guy's an asshole. And so he just takes him over because he's getting ready to push Jake. And this is the moment that we heard from the first book where Jake gets pushed into traffic.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't get pushed into traffic because Roland stops him from getting pushed into traffic. And that matters.
Paradox.
A lot. And he's like, all right, well, that was probably a mistake, but moving on. And he's like, okay, so this guy's a bad guy. I don't give a shit what happens to him. I need some guns and I know I can bring things over. So let's make this happen. So he finds a gun store.
I need penicillin and I need guns and bullets.
I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it right now. Because he knows from being in this guy's head, this guy's a serial killer. And he's the one who dropped the brick on Odetta. He's the one who pushed her over into the train track and got her legs cut off, basically. And she was only saved because there was a doctor right there. So this guy's a bad dude. And he's like, I owe nothing to this man. So he takes him to a gun store. I love how he has to ask. He's like, where do they sell weapons?
Yeah.
It's like, what? And he's like, weapons. And so he goes to the gun store and he's like, I need a bullet. And the guy's like, I mean, okay, but like, there's a lot of those.
My brother's got a gun that I shot years ago. I need the bullets for it. I'll know the bullet if I see it.
He's like, what?
Yeah, buddy. I don't think you'll recognize the bullet. But okay, here's the what does he call it? The gun Bible or
yeah, it's
the
like
something Bible. And he's like, a proper name.
So he flips through the thing and he sees like, oh yeah, these are the largest possible bullet. They're like, whatever the bullet I need is.
The biggest bullet you can get in a handgun.
He's like,
it's not the biggest bullet, but it's pretty big.
He's like, how many come in a box? And the guy's like, oh, I don't know, like 20. He's
50.
like 50. And he
50
goes,
in a box.
He goes, riches. This is probably the best scene.
And he's like, how much for a box? $20. Jack Mort, how much money do you have? I got $62 in my wallet. 3 boxes then.
He's like,
unimaginable wealth.
I know. Because he comes from such a culture of scarcity. They have like nothing.
Right, and he's looking at the bullet.
Yeah.
He took one out of a box. And he's like, I can tell it's the right bullet, even though it's not handmade.
Yeah.
It's not hand forged.
He's like, oh yes. And so, but he can't buy them because he doesn't have the permission card, the license to purchase it.
He doesn't have a gun license, yeah.
And so he drops his wallet and kicks it under the
So I had
under the
read
desk.
this book years ago, and I'm listening to the audiobook this time, and I'm glad that I forget books really easily. Because I was like, I don't remember why he kicks his wallet under the counter. What is his plan here? And so I got to relive it for the first time.
Yeah. This is a very good example of Roland's cunning. Because
Yeah.
we've gotten a lot of Roland being just like a ball rolling down a hill, like an immovable force heading, or an unstoppable
Unstoppable
force
force.
heading towards an immovable object. We got a lot of that.
Yeah.
But we don't get a lot of like Roland is quick on his feet and he's a quick thinker
Yeah.
and he's a smart man.
Yeah.
And so he drops his wallet, he kicks it under the counter, and then he goes out to the gunslingers in the car down the way, which are cops. And he's like, that man stole my wallet. Like, what? He's like, I gave him my wallet to look at my card, and he refused to give it back. And he has a gun under the counter. And they're like, oh. So they end up going in there, and he steals the ammo while this guy's getting raided.
Yeah.
And then he leaves.
Well, no, the cops are hassling this guy.
Yeah.
And he's providing testimony that the cops can use to justify, like, seizing all this guy's stuff. And then he knocks out the cops.
Yes. He bangs their heads together.
Yeah. And then he takes the ammo. He gets 4 boxes of ammo. Which
riches.
And then he gives the guy all the money in Mort's wallet.
Yeah, he pays for them.
Yeah, he's like, here's for the ammo. Like, I'm not going to stiffy it. He's like, and yeah, I've taken away all of the evidence that the gunslingers had to justify them coming in here and hassling you. So you should be able to get out of anything. That whatever. And he takes the cops' guns.
Yes.
Oh, and
he straps them across his hip.
Low slung, like it feels like this is how Han Solo wears his.
Yeah.
Where it's like mid thigh.
For draw. That's for like the quick draw. You put him lower down on your leg.
Yeah.
And so he goes to a drugstore. He's like, where do I get Keflex? And he's like, I don't know, man. There's like a drugstore down the way. So he goes down the way and he's robbing the drugstore.
Yeah, he's walking through the aisles of the like convenience store, drugstore, and I love how well it's written that Roland is just marveling at all of these things just on the shelves
for him to buy
at this store. Yeah,
like he could just pick it up right now. All these things that for him are scarce resources.
Yeah,
they're just here. So he pulls the gun on the guy. He does another third party step here, where we get it from the point of view of the pharmacist.
Yeah,
which is this is a signature Stephen King move.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's flip it. Let's see this scene from a bystander's point of view.
Yeah,
and so we go into the head of the pharmacist for a minute because this guy walks in, pulls a gun on him, and he's like, "Give me all your penicillin." And he's like, "What?" And he's like, "All of it, your penicillin." And then he pays for the penicillin too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because he gets all the Keflex, because he's trying to say Keflex and he can't really say Keflex. And he's like, you mean like Keflex penicillin, like antibiotics? And he's like, yeah, that. Give me all of that. All you have on the shelf, all of it. And he puts that in his bag. He calls it a purse, which I love. He doesn't call it a sack. He doesn't try to masculinize the bag that he's carrying. He's like, yeah, it's my fucking purse. So he takes the purse and leaves because he's got one final thing to do. And at this point, he's being chased by the cops.
I love the pharmacist assistant's line. All that penicillin, and he doesn't even sound like he has a cold.
Well, then they shoot up the drugstore, which he's like, wow, okay. You're not a great gunslinger. You could have hit somebody.
Right.
He's like, I am disappointed.
You have forgotten the face of your father.
So he ends up running away, running down into the subway. And my favorite part is they shoot him and he's like lights on fire. like something sparks and it starts his suit jacket on fire.
Yeah.
But Roland doesn't give a shit because it's not his body.
Right.
So he feels it, but he's like, whatever, I don't care. And Mort's
And
like, I'm on fire.
And he can disregard the pain anyway.
Yeah,
He can just push through it.
right. And so Mort's like, help, I'm on fire. And he ends up jumping in front of a train.
Right. Just at the last second.
And so the gunslinger pulls everything through to the beach, jumps off, and kills Jack Mort all in one moment.
Yep.
And when he comes back, he's like, yes.
And I liked that when he got shot, he's like, ah, yes, a good gunslinger. that gunslinger knows how to use his weapon.
But he times this so that Detta/Odetta will look in and see Jack Mort and see herself reflected all at the same
Right.
time.
Because he's looking out the door,
Right.
which
And we know Eddie mentioned
from the beginning. Yeah.
Eddie mentioned there was a point where he was coming through the door where he could see himself from Roland's point of view.
Right.
They merged for 1 second when he's coming through the door.
Yeah.
And so as he's coming through the door, mentally, he's like, look, Detta, look. And so she turns because he looks through the door and sees her. She's snuck up on them because when they get back to the door, she's missing. And it's because Detta has taken over.
Eddie all tied up.
Yeah, she trusses him up and puts him down by
Down the beach.
Yeah. So that when the lobstrosities come, he'll get eaten, which we get a really cool moment where we think it's from Eddie's point of view, and it's the lobstrosity coming up and like hitting Eddie in the face and taking off part of his face and exploding his eye.
Yeah.
And then Roland is like, don't think about it. Don't think about it. And we realize it's just him catastrophizing
Mhm.
what could be happening to Eddie while he's trying to get Jack Mort through this moment.
Yeah.
So Eddie is very close to dying. Odetta is very close to she tries to shoot Roland, but it's a dead shell.
Yeah.
And then she's going to try again. And then she turns and looks through the door, and there's a moment where she witnesses all of herself.
Yeah.
Because Detta and Odetta don't know that they both exist. And so now they are faced with the reality of the fact that there are two of them. And it ends up merging their personalities into Susanna.
Which is her middle name.
Which is her middle name.
Yeah.
And so Roland comes back, but Roland is not well. Eddie is trussed up down by the water. And so the woman with no legs below the knee has to help save everybody, like cut Eddie free.
Mm-hmm.
Eddie drags everybody up the beach. We all get saved, but it's a really good ending. It's a very dramatic ending to the book. Because from there, it's just the gunslinger taking another round of antibiotics, the second shuffle, the reshuffle or whatever, because he...
Oh, yeah, I do like the...
Final shuffle.
When it's Roland's perspective while he's like fever delirious.
Yeah.
He describes it as shuffle.
Yeah.
Because he's going through these like delirium episodes where he's hallucinating, but also maybe prophesying.
Yeah, a lot's happening for Roland in that moment. And we go through it again where he does another reshuffle.
But then he also has this, I don't want to say psychological trauma. It's a break in his memories, his recollections, because he saved Jake.
Yeah.
And so now he's having like dual conflicting
Well, that's
memories.
not till the very end.
Okay.
And we don't really find out that that's happening until the third book.
Right.
But what's happening is he's delirious, and his, like he says later, dreams have meaning, or not all dreams are just dreams.
Right.
And so he's like moving between the dreaming world and the real world. And so he's experiencing things in both that are significant, but are more abstract in the dream world than they are in the real world.
Mm.
And I'm sure if you read it all, went back and reread it, there's a lot happening in the shuffle that comes up later.
Yeah.
But we end with Eddie kind of forgiving Roland, or realizing that Roland is so driven, he will hurt himself in order to keep moving forward. And he's asking Roland, like, what's going to happen to us? Are you going to get her killed? Because he's fallen in love with Susanna.
Mhm.
And he's like, are you going to get her killed? And Roland goes, we all die in time. It's not just the world that moves on. He looked squarely at Eddie, his faded blue eyes almost the color of slate in this light. But we will be magnificent.
Yep.
There's more than a world to win, Eddie. I would not risk you and her. I would not have allowed the boy to die if that's all there was. And so Eddie says, what are you talking about? And he goes, everything there is, the gunslinger said calmly. We are going to go, Eddie. We are going to fight. We are going to be hurt. And in the end, we will stand. And now it was Eddie who said nothing. He could think of nothing to say. Roland gently grasped Eddie's arms. Even the damned love, he said. I love Roland so much. Because then everybody goes to sleep and he's just sitting there listening to the voices of the night while the wind dried the tears on his cheeks. Damnation, salvation, the tower. He would come to the tower and there he would sing their names. There he would sing their names. There he would sing their names. The sun stained the east a dusky rose, and at last Roland, no longer the last gunslinger, but one of the last three, slept and dreamed his angry dreams, through which there ran only the one soothing blue thread. There I will sing all their names. It will be worth it, is what he's saying.
Yeah.
Everything that I'm giving up, once I get to the tower, it'll feel worth it. Because he's already had a party, and the whole party died.
Mm-hmm.
And now he's got another party, and it's probably like, okay, well, now I've got more cannon fodder for my trip to the tower.
Yeah.
But I love them, but I will definitely let them die if that's what I have to do. And that's the end of the second book. Way better. Way better.
Huge improvement.
Oh, huge. Huge. You get it.
Huge.
Huge. I almost wish it was the Dark Tower, the Gunslinger prologue.
Yeah.
So you knew it was the prologue. It kind of reminds me of Sarah J. Maas's Throne of Glass series.
Mm-hmm.
It's better. Don't get me wrong. If you've listened to any of my Feast, Sheath, and Shatter episodes about that, you will know how I feel about that series. But Assassin's Blade, which is the prologue, is terrible. It's the worst book of the whole series, but it's the prologue. If you read that first, I would have bailed completely if I wasn't doing it for the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
I feel that way about this. If you'd just given me the Dark Tower and said, here, this is a really great series, I'd have read that one and been like, I'm not seeing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
it needs a foreword or something.
It needs to be labeled the prologue. You can't start with the drawing of the three.
Oh yeah. Maybe it's like the Dark Tower Part 0.
Yeah.
Or 0.1.
Origins or something like that. You have to start with it. You have to start there.
Right. You have to know who Roland is in the drawing of the three. But your expectations for starting a series would be assisted.
Yeah.
With the context that the Gunslinger, the book, is just the origin story of this solo badass on a mission.
Yeah. I'm going to read the revised version because I wonder if it matches a little better, because it does not match. These don't match in terms of how they're written, in terms of Roland. The vibe is entirely different. It's like he solidified it between the first and the second one. I'm wondering
if the audiobook that I listened to was the revised version.
It could have been. Probably. If it was after 2003, it would have been.
Yeah.
And I found a copy. I checked a copy out from the library, so I'm all set. I'm going to read it for sure, because I feel like he sat down, like he had it in his head. He knew what he wanted, but then he sat down and really storyboarded it. There's no way he's keeping up with all of this shit. He doesn't have it written down somewhere. Right. And then he was like, okay, I got it. And then he wrote the drawing of the three, and then it was like, oh, I need to go back and make them match.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to read it because I have a feeling that's what he did. And if you're reading these for the first time, don't start with the non-revised version. Just go ahead straight to the revised version, because that's what if Stephen King did it, then he wants you to read the revised version.
Right.
Which I didn't even know that was a thing. And now I do. And so now I'm going to read it. And we move on to the third one. And this actually almost feels like a prologue in and of itself. Because
because it's just getting the party together.
Because it's just getting the party together. We're moving towards the tower in that the doors are on their way to the tower. Like they're moving towards the tower and the doors occur along the path. But there's nothing about the tower. We don't get any more world building. Because we're on the beach the whole time.
Right.
There's not even any like sexy times speaking demon circles in this one. So it's like okay. We didn't meet anyone else. We didn't interact with any towns. We didn't get any flashbacks about his life. This was literally just establishing the party.
Yep.
And it's great. It doesn't drag at all for what it is, considering it has as much plot as the first one. Which is why I'm like, yeah, which is they're just journey. Actually, more happens in the first book than in this one. I mean, stuff happens in Eddie's life. Stuff happens like with Detta/Odetta, but a lot of that is just tension. It's not actual action. It's just like, this is a dangerous character. We're stuck with her. What do we do about it?
Yeah.
But the fact that this is much more compelling tells me he probably made the first one more compelling too. Anyway, I guess we'll just leave it there. Did you have anything else you wanted to add about this book?
Nope. I think we'll just go on to
the third one.
The Wastelands.
Yeah.
So remember, sometimes the strangest things are the most beautiful too.
So be who you are and love what you love. Until next time, friends.
Bye.